So we're going to be recording this session. Welcome, everyone. And thank you for joining us. This is our fire session for the design leadership, where we're trying to elevate the conversation on design leadership. And I have some special guests that I'll be introducing very soon. And welcome everyone again. So if you didn't yet, please put in the chat where you are joining us from. We always love to see where everyone is joining us. So I'll introduce these amazing people who are here with me very soon. And if you don't know us yet, I would like to introduce ECHOS. We are an independent global innovation lab driven by design. At ECHOS, we really work with design and desirable futures. We have 3 business units: ECHOS, the School of Design Thinking, ECHOS Innovation Projects, and ECHOS Ventures. And obviously, this design leadership is hosted by the School of Design Thinking. And in the innovation projects, we usually help business and organizations to create innovation for good, working with service design, digital products, and things like that. And in the School of Design Thinking, we help people and organizations master the innovations, mindsets, skills, and tools. We are located in a few places. We are here in Australia, and I'm located in Sydney, but we also have our team spread in Brazil, in Portugal, and now in the US as well, and some people in Italy. So we have people and teams in different parts of the world. So we mostly operate in APAC, in Latin America, in Europe, and a little bit in North America. And this is a little bit of our tracking record for the past years. ECHOS turned 10 years last year. We are almost turning 11 already. We have already more than 40,000 people who participated in our courses and more than 150 projects developed throughout the years. And we are very proud to be part of the Global Design Thinking Alliance, where there is research being done on design thinking. So there is all of these other schools that are part of the Design Thinking Alliance. We are one of them, and we are very proud to be part of it. And now I'm going to quickly present you to the design leadership. So design leadership was our first global program of the School of Design Thinking. We launched season 1 last year. Peter already participated as a global masterclass last year. Vivian is joining us for the 2nd season. And last year we had amazing designers and 150 people join us to participate in the course. So for the design leadership, we are doing season 2 this year. It was a success. And for season 2, that is very similar to what happened last year. We have 12 global masterclasses and 12 regional workshops. So how it works is that everyone comes together for the global masterclasses from all around the world. And you have inspiring leaders such as Peter and Vivian. And for the regional workshops, you have a more intimate cohort, only about 30 people, where you can exchange your learnings, your challenges, and you can apply everything that you have been learning from the masterclasses within a smaller cohort, where you can basically exchange ideas and evolve your design leadership. So this is our program journey for the 12 weeks. We have developed it to be kind of like really hands-on, but also elevating and helping rising design leaders and helping to elevate what design leadership means nowadays for 2022 and beyond. And we have the topics of design leadership, minimum viable competences, articulating the value of design, service design as a new management, creating high-value products, facilitation as a leadership skill, then shaping diverse teams and cultures, design ethics and impact, and decolonizing design, shaping organizations through design ops, creating a future vision, new technologies and boundaries, and paths for design leaders. And the course was based on this framework, where we think that as a design leader, you need to understand that you need to create your better knowledge on how you're going to be leading and how you understand yourself. So what is your purpose as a leader? How do you know your strengths and flaws? How do you build your next steps in the design leadership? But you also need to lead others. So how do you give feedback? How do you hire and manage? How do you create an interesting design culture? How do you shape and manage teams? You also need to deliver interesting and high impact products and services. So how do you go to the excellence of the last mile of design in those? And then lastly, you also need to think about systems. So how do you create impact through your leadership? And how do you think about ethics and impact? How do you work with systemic design? How you design your organization? How you build your design ops? So this is what the course will be dealing with throughout the 12 weeks. And for season 2, we have already confirmed these amazing 8 masterclasses. We're still going to be confirming the next 4 in the next couple of weeks. But we have here Birgit Mager, Bruce Mao, Vivian Castillo, who is with us today, Adam Lawrence, Phil Balagtas, Peter Merho is also here today, Stephen Gates, and Jim Litka. And all of these sessions, they happen usually on Mondays, and the regional workshops, the global masterclasses on Mondays, and the regional workshops on Wednesdays. So if you want to know more, please get in touch. We'll be more than happy to chat with you. Luna, our program manager, can always organize a chat or answer your emails. So feel free to tag along. And today, for this session, we're going to be discussing more about articulating the value of design and why design leadership matters. So I want to welcome again our panelists and also global masterclasses. So together here with me, if you don't know them, I have Vivian Castillo. Vivian is an equitable innovation consultant, researcher, and humanity and tech advocate. And she's also the founder of Humanity Centered. Am I pronouncing these correctly, Vivian?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, okay, thank you. And Humanity Center is a counseling and human service profession who and she made a career and switch in the UX and tech industry. And she's now a recovering from corporate America Black woman, an absurdly passionate self-care advocate, and adaptable and ambitious, pragmatic, and committed to choosing courage over comfort in every facet of her life. And Vivian, I just want to tell you that you already have been teaching us so much with the design leadership. So thank you for all your inputs in the program, and welcome. And I also wanted to welcome Peter, who has worked at the intersection of design, technology, and humans for over 25 years. He co-founded Adaptive Path, the premier user experience consultancy acquired by Capital One in 2014. And since leaving Adaptive Path, he's worked as a design leader and executive, leading teams at Groupon, OpenTable, Jawbone, Capital One, and Kaiser Permanente. So Peter has long been a contributor to the profession of design community through his writing, conference, speaking, events hosting, and in 2016, he wrote the book Org Design for Design Orgs, which all of my peer design managers, they always say, this is the textbook when you become manager, when you become a leader. So have a look. It is an amazing book. So welcome, Peter and Vivian and all of you. And this is going to be a really relaxed session. I'm going to be asking some questions and we're going to be debating. So if you have questions in the middle, please put them in the chat. I'll try to bring them to the panelists, and we'll get started. So Peter and Vivian, would you like to just say a quick hi before I jump start to the questions?
I'll start. Hi. Good day, everyone, whatever time it is, and looking forward to while it might be relaxed, I'm hoping it's still a lively conversation.
Hey, everyone. Super excited to be on the call today, calling in from Chicago, where it is a warm and humid 37 degrees Fahrenheit. Just kidding, it's quite cold, but looking forward to being with y'all and having a engaging conversation.
Thank you. So I'll start with our first question, and I might start with Peter on this one. So Peter, maybe you can start and then Vivian can jump in. So Peter, what is design leadership in your opinion?
You like to start with the simple ones, huh?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna take this in a direction that's probably a little unexpected. Because design leadership can mean a lot of different things, or when we think of design leadership, we tend to think of a lot of different things. But what I think it rolls back to is this idea of leading within an organization with humanism. I see design as a means by which we bring more humanistic practices into the organizations that we operate. Typically, we're operating in organizations that are very technical, very business driven, lots of numbers, lots of quantification. And the practice of design is another way of, it brings a distinct way of tackling the challenges that these organizations face. And one that I think, when done right, starts with humanism, starts with an understanding of people, and not just an understanding of people, but compassion for those people, and trying to figure out how we can best serve those people. And so when I think of design leadership, I think, how do you lead with humanism? How do you bring this lens, this distinct lens to the work you're doing? It's not about being the VP of design or director of design or having some formal leadership title. It's how do you encourage others to embrace this humanistic perspective in the work that they're doing?
Yeah, and I feel like, and just some context to my answer, I'm a Black woman, American, and I'm a millennial. So that's going to shape a little bit of how I see design leadership, especially I come from a counseling and human services background, specifically trauma and addiction counseling, and I made a career switch into design and big tech. So when I think about that question, what is design leadership? My first thought goes to what kind of baffled me about design leadership when I made a career switch into this industry. And for me, I think that, when I made a career switch into this industry, a lot of design leadership was kind of built on years in the industry, title, perhaps what go-to methodology within design that you coined or helped to evangelize within the industry. And I think that design leadership is less about years of experience. I think it's less about title. For me, I think it's about, and when you're thinking about within an organizational context, I think about two aspects. Design leadership when it comes to stakeholders or decision makers that you're trying to influence. Design leadership is the ability to connect the head knowledge of the issue to the heart knowledge of the issue for the stakeholders so that it evokes action and a commitment to change, whether that be to a product, whether that be to culture and the way that you team, the way that you lead. So there's one aspect. And then the second aspect that I'm thinking about is design leadership within the context of teams and management. And for me, that is the ability to create the space and safety required for designers to do the personal work required to do our best professional work. And that includes being more human-centered, holistically human-centered. That includes doing work around your biases, the unconscious things that they are maybe including within your design decisions. And so a good leader will allow their teammates and will help their team to have a more holistic approach to this work. And within, I think to Peter's comment about organizations, made a comment about organizations and the systems that we work in are very technical. Sure, they're very business driven. But at the same time too, a lot of our organizations were built to exploit. And I think sometimes, and I've seen this within design, within product, sometimes organizations will use things like empathy as a way to exploit consumers and customers. And so design leadership is about challenging that. How do you understand people in a way that isn't ultimately used to either advance further oppression for those people or as a way to just use them to get every dollar you can out of them?
Wow, you already started with a bang here. That's amazing. Look, I think that you both touched on points that are very important. So we were talking about humanism, we were talking about empathy, and Vivian, you brought this aspect of maybe some organizations using empathy and maybe design per se for exploitation. And you're saying that maybe it's the role of design leaders to challenge that. And I just wanted to expand a little bit here because I think this is connected to the second question of how we're going to be articulating the value of design. But there are many, as far as I understood from what you're saying, there are a few layers in being a design leader, because it means that you're going to be leading for the end user, customer, or stakeholders who are involved. You're going to be leading for your internal team. You're going to be leading for society, for the bigger picture, for the future, for the present, fixing the past, maybe. There are so many layers that we are dealing with. And sometimes inside organizations, this can be very hard. So sometimes we need to articulate the value of design in order to reach that. So I wanted to hear from you, how do you, design leadership is so important, and the complexity of design leadership. I think we are in a moment, I mean, maybe there was always like this, but maybe we're more aware of it now. Because maybe before we didn't think with so much depth of all the layers of design leadership. But how do we articulate this value of design? How do we get lost? For example, maybe we think that we are doing something as an intent that it maybe is positive, but in the end, it gets derailed because of the, I don't know, stakeholders who are involved or the ecosystem. How do you articulate this value of design to really create real impact? And what do you think about articulating value of design? Is this something that we should do? Should we not do? Does it matter? I don't know. I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I'm curious about Peter's answer. And I think even too, maybe if you can also define what you mean by humanism, because I think that will help me understand how you're also articulating the value of design with that lens.
How I'm defining humanism? I just
Yeah.
think putting the human at the center and recognize, and so human centered, but also I'm defining humanism kind of drawn from the humanities. So that set of practices, humanities, liberal arts, right? That set of practices where we seek to understand people and their behavior. So that's my humanistic orientation. So
Okay.
connecting it with humane, human-centered, and the humanities.
That's helpful. Yeah, I mean, I can go first then to answer this question if you want. And again, my mind always thinks about, when I'm thinking about these questions, is I feel like the way a lot of people maybe would have answered this before the pandemic looks different than the way that you answer it now. So when I'm talking to within Humanity Centered, we talk to individuals, but we also work with organizations and executives. And one thing that I'm talking to leaders about a lot these days is understanding that people's values have changed. So, and I think that we're also seeing that within design and how you articulate the value of design. So, and again, keeping my context in mind as I'm answering this question, I think a lot of times when I've seen design and the way that's been articulated as valuable to a company, it often ignores or deprioritizes minoritized or marginalized communities. And you could see this even within larger companies like Amazon, for example. Technically, Amazon followed the playbook of the value of design and being quote unquote human-centered. The problem with Amazon, though, is that at the cost of being customer-centric, they also ignored the impact it would have on the ecosystem around the customer. So you think about warehouse workers, et cetera. And so when I'm thinking about the value of design these days, I think it's about getting closer to a more equitable and inclusive understanding of design because of the reality, which is that society is becoming less tolerable of people being excluded. I think people, especially within the pandemic, are realizing, I think I want more and I deserve more. And so the standards of quality and what is acceptable is being raised. So when I'm talking to executives, and I'll wrap this up real quick. One of the things I talk about is how valuing design is actually a business imperative. Because if you don't understand people in a holistic and inclusive manner, then you're also missing out on opportunity to connect your business to connect different opportunities with your audience, with people who might desire solutions that you're proposing. And so I try to lean a little bit less too on the whole business case for, hey, if you're more inclusive and equitable in design, you'll make more money, because I think what it ends up doing is it reinforces the exploitative nature of design and the ways that companies can use design as a Trojan horse for capitalism.
It's funny because I mean, you and I are a lot, I believe, aligned. I see design as a Trojan horse for humanism, right? Companies have figured out or seem to believe they need design. They don't really know what it is beyond it's what makes things pretty, or it makes my product more usable. And my hope is that we can use that need for design to Trojan horse humanism and true human-centeredness into these organizations. It's a big ask, but I don't know another lever, or it's the lever that I'm familiar with. And as you were talking, I just wrote on the whiteboard, and I might make notes. Kind of a shift from value to values is what I took away, and a recognition of values. I think, to Juliana's initial question as well, in terms of articulating the value of design, if we articulate the value of design only within the context of a company that we are working for, we're missing out on other impacts that design has, that has value, notably societal impacts. A few other thoughts. I was trying to remember. There's a design leader, Kim Goodwin, wrote a book called Designing for the Digital Age. She's spoken at lots of conferences, and her pinned tweet is something that comes up a fair bit, which is, it's not about whether your organization values design, it's about whether your organization truly values humans. I think that's where we ought to be trying to center this conversation, which is going to be really hard, because most folks on this call, right, are design leaders whose efforts are expected to be valued in fairly kind of straightforward business cases with acquisition or engagement metrics and those types of things. And not to say that those aren't, not to exclude those or to set those aside, but those are incomplete, right? We need to be figuring out what is a fuller understanding of value when it comes to design. And it might be impossible to do it if we're only doing it within the organizations that we operate in. So one of the books I have up here is Ruined by Design. Vivian actually wrote the foreword to this book. It's written by Mike Montero. And towards the end of the book, he starts advocating for certification, unions, other forms of professionalizing design. And I think if we're going to be able to realize this fuller value of design, we need to be able to protect designers within organizations to challenge exploitative practices, because right now they're not. If you're a designer who starts telling the product people we shouldn't do that because it's exploitative, they'll just let you go and find someone who will do it. And so this raises this question of how do we set up structures as an industry that enable people to put those humans at the center and not be punished when doing so.
I like where this conversation is going, and I think it's very interesting. This also reminded me, because you were talking about, Vivian started talking about that now the values change because of the pandemic. So articulating the value of design changed because the values changed as well. And then we started talking about maybe we, as design, or what was known as design, the value of what design would deliver to an organization was that it would bring user centricity. But then now, after I started saying, no, it's not user centricity, it's human centricity, because we need to think about all of the stakeholders. So you were talking, Vivian, about the case from Amazon, for example, of the people who work in the warehouses, that maybe they're not human-centric in this way. And then I think Peter was talking about humanism. So maybe it's about this other layer of being society-centric, And I just wanted to bring also another term and kind of way of thinking that I think Bruce Mao, who's also in the program, also talks about, that is about being life-centric, right? So it's not only about humans, but lives, right? So what about the animals, all the ecosystem and things like that. But what I wanted to bring also and to add, because Peter, you were saying now about the fact that maybe in the end of the book from Ruined by Design by Mike Montero, he was talking about bringing this conversation of creating this parameter and these, let's say, rails that would help us guide where good design is being made and that is ethical, that is following all the rules, or we don't screw up basically for the future. But I think if we go to this other level, because if you are a product designer, like you were saying, and you say, hey, we cannot do this because whatever, you're going to be excluded from this situation. So if you scale up and create these things, this is also something that you talk about, Peter, that I just remembered, that is about becoming an architect, that you architect kind of like the ecosystem to help you drive change. You're not alone being the person who would be standing up and then being the person who will be excluded, right? So you're architecting this change. I don't know if this makes sense. Do you think that when we are articulating the value of design in a way, we need to be these architects because we need to foster this bigger change in a way when we are designing, and when we are design leaders, basically? What do you think about?
Yeah, no, that's where I go when it comes to this type of stuff, is to try to think. Someone mentioned systems design in the chat. To try to think systemically about the situation that you're in and how all the components of that system behave or affect one another, and to try not to just identify like a point solution, but to figure out how do you orchestrate something that can operate at a more systemic level. I'm talking in the abstract here. So one of the challenges as a design leader then is when and Vivian earlier used the idea of making space, right? How do we make space to allow folks to push back on that which isn't ethical? And that's one of the challenges that we need to be stepping up as design leaders to embrace, is figuring out how we work with our peers. How do we use our station in the organization to enable that, enable difficult conversations to happen? I don't have a great answer in terms of mechanisms by which to do it, but this is the work that we need to do in order to enable that full human centricity within the organizations that we're part of.
Yeah, and I have some thoughts on that. I think a lot of folks in design are attracted to this industry because of its ideals around empathy and inclusion and being human-centered. But then a lot of people aren't necessarily prepared for how to advance that work in systems that are inherently hostile towards it. I don't think a lot of people are necessarily prepared on how do you politic in capitalistic systems. And specifically in the United States, I was talking to someone the other day and they were like, in the same way, China is viewed as being extreme around communism, America is extreme with capitalism. And so when you start to work in these very capitalistic systems that inherently are kind of banking on you, not fully acknowledging your own humanity, when you understand historically, some of the organizational management techniques that are used in corporate America actually stem from recommendations that were given to plantation owners. When you understand like the context of these systems, then as designers, it ends up challenging your approach to how do you actually get people to buy into an idea of actually being inclusive and equitable, acknowledging privilege, acknowledging the way white supremacy plays a part in our work. And so for me, and I'll give you a little context, I used to work at Salesforce as a researcher and innovation consultant. And, I was only at Salesforce for about 2 years, but within a year of me being there, had strategically developed relationships where I was on a texting and FaceTiming basis with a couple of their C-level executives. I was informing internal policy around diversity, equity, inclusion. I was being invited to internal and external leadership offsites to do trainings and consulting. And so as designers, I actually challenge folks to start building relationships outside of the design org. You know, if you are in a company where you have an organizational chart, I encourage people to study that, to understand who are the decision makers. If they have an EA, getting close to that EA, because EAs understand their managers the best. And you know, and there's a lot of other practical things that I've done in the past, even in terms of putting reminders in my phone to follow up with certain leaders outside of my org in order to continue building that relationship. I want to understand, like, what keeps my manager up at night. I want to understand who are the leaders that they're concerned about, and then who are those leaders concerned about in terms of who they need to impress or who they need to influence. And the last thing I'll say too, in terms of how to be more strategic in finding language to advocate for design decisions that may not be popular or, you know, viewed as good for the business, is, and this is easier to do with publicly traded companies. A lot of publicly traded companies in the States, for example, have something called a 10K report. K is in kangaroo. 10K report is essentially a public report that stakeholders, shareholders use in order to determine if they are going to make a financial investment into the business, if it's going to make them money. And within a 10K report, there's a section that talks about risks to the business that the business board is aware of. So what I've done in the past is I'll pull up a 10K report. I'll look to the risks or the things that they're maybe concerned about that might be happening within the org. And I'll tie some of the design decisions or research decisions that I want and know need to be implemented into the product or into the business. And I'll tie it back into what is being mentioned to shareholders. So for me, it's less about as a designer or a designer, how do you position yourself in the company, and more about it's a relationship exercise. It's about thinking about who are the leaders and decision makers outside of the design org, or who are working closely with the design org, where you need to create that buy-in, where you need to create that rapport and that trust. And so, yeah, I'll stop there.
Well, and I'll just affirm that. I mean, when I, so for Echos, I'm doing a talk on shaping organizations through design ops. I also do a design leadership talk in some other contexts. And one of the things leadership kind of boils down to relationships. I mean, exactly what Vivian is saying. That's one of the things that took me like 25 years to realize. It seems so simple, but it took a while for me to unpack that. Leadership is relationship, and it's something that I see a lot of design leaders not being very good at. Design leaders are very good at what they're familiar with already in terms of their teams. They struggle to break outside of that and develop relationships with others in these organizations. But to Vivian's point, that's how you're going to have this type of impact.
Yeah, and I just want last comment on that. I think too, being able to recognize later that relationships are important also is a reflection of privilege, right? Because I think, you know, when you come from a minoritized or marginalized community and just being able to operate in this world, you already know that like relationships are a key to navigating it, whether it's getting a sponsor, getting a mentor. And so I remember reading, I think Brene Brown talks about this group of research that basically says that the more white, middle-class, Judeo-Christian that you are, the less critical awareness skills that you have, because it's not a survival skill. And so I think too, when you look at design leadership, and this is maybe getting ahead in some of your questions here, I think that a lot of design leaders that if I asked you to name 5 design leaders that come to mind, a lot of well-known design leaders tend to be white, American, male. You got some females in there, but I think it's important to acknowledge the role of privilege and how that has shaped our understanding of design leadership and how we advocate for people, and even our understanding of humanism or human centricity. Like, I think if we had a whole separate conversation about humanism, I think me and Peter might have different understandings of what does that mean and look like, and that's okay. But I think it does acknowledge that we are, I think, at a time where we are kind of challenging the status quo of human-centeredness in design, of what's maybe been tolerated or accepted the last 5, 10, or whatever years.
Thank you, Vivian and Peter. This is amazing conversation. It's already like blowing my brain here. Thank you for it. I'll just change a little bit and kind of add, because we were talking in a very systemic level, right? So I might try to kind of give another perspective for our cohort here about the more tactical, let's say, perspective. So what do you think that are the main challenges of design leadership? When you were there in this position, you're already there, let's say. What do you think are the main challenges in terms of the more tactical things? Because we're talking about a very systemic, let's say, scale. But I think there are many others that are very in this other layer. What do you think they are, and what do you think that we could maybe do about it? Maybe I'll start with you, Peter, because I know that the next question I'll be starting.
Well, I've got 2 answers to this question. One that goes back to when I was framing design leadership earlier as something that's not just what like people with the title director do, but something that anyone in an organization can do. But the challenge of design leadership is that, at least in my worldview, design done right runs so contrary to how most organizations operate that you find yourself constantly figuring out how to get that approach to take root, and just kind of running up against just like the blank stares of others when you start talking about the way that you think the way you want to operate. So that's one approach. A related but I think more perhaps tactical answer to this, and that one that will, I think, kind of more closely resonate with the audience is I think the main challenge of design leadership is we don't do a good job of helping people understand what it is, and so design leaders don't know how to practice leadership, right? And so as designers become design leaders and managers and whatnot, they continue to do what they've done before and don't realize that there's a new set of skills they need to bring to bear in order to succeed as a leader. So that's probably the thing I see most common. Ryan Rumsey just wrote a very long tweet thread about this earlier today, where he said that like most design VPs are behaving as directors and managers. And that's in large part because they don't know what it means to be a VP, because no one's told them. And I think one of the challenges that we have for leadership generally, but design leadership in particular, is a lack of just awareness of what the role is and how to do it. And that's become part of my personal mission, is trying to explain it and expose it so that folks have some sense of not just what's expected of them, but what leverage they have, what power they have, what influence they actually have. Because I think a lot of design leaders don't wield that leadership as fully as they could.
Can I just add on that, that Peter, you have written a lot in your book, of course, but I know that in your blog recently you have been writing a little bit of what are these roles, what can we do? So I think if anyone is interested, I would definitely recommend for you to check out the book, but also the latest blog articles from Peter in his website, because there is a lot there of showing what we should be doing in those different positions or not doing, maybe. Vivian, sorry, you were going to say something.
Oh, no, it's okay. Yeah, I mean, maybe design leaders don't know how to be leaders. Maybe there's a chunk of those out there. And I think what that probably boils down to, this is my theory. I think that might boil down to there's this kind of sector of design leaders who kind of like built their career off of this desire for relevance. And what I'm seeing now is this shift towards this desire for maturity. Bear with me a little bit. If you think about a lot of well-known design leaders, I'm going to generalize a little bit. A lot of well-known design leaders, again, they're either older or they made their career by evangelizing, putting a stake in the ground over a methodology, maybe a design practice or consultancy they founded, whatever it may be. And to their credit, they did so much for the design and UX industry because really they had to deal with the task of showing design or showing companies and businesses that design was important and that design mattered and that design needed to be prioritized in the business. And so there was this desire and pursuit of relevancy. And now what I'm noticing is now you have 4 generations in the workforce. And when you look at older and the younger generations, Gen X and baby boomers, and then millennials and Gen Zers, there's some differences that are occurring. A lot of the well-known design leaders tend to be Gen X or baby boomers. When you look at millennials and Gen Zers who are now entering the workforce and are entering the design industry, tend to be more diverse. We've also had the privilege of being able to talk more openly about racism, mental health, all those things. But now what you're also noticing is there are, I think, a lot of younger folks within the industry who actually have a higher level of expertise and competencies in areas related to inclusivity in design and accessibility and how to be equitable. And a lot of well-known design leaders don't have that expertise and they do not have those competencies. And so what I'm noticing is this like tension that's kind of happening within the design community. And so I think one of the main challenges of design leadership, especially as you think about more established design leaders, is humility. Because I think that pride is probably one of the greatest occupational hazards within our field. And so what could it look like if there was more collaboration, if there was more of a willingness to share power and share the stage when it came to moving from the state of relevancy, which we had to do in order to get these positions in these companies and within these different organizations? How can we shift more from a desire for relevancy to a desire for maturity in terms of what does it mean to actually be holistically and equitably human-centered? What does it look like for designers to be the most comfortable, because we should be the most comfortable in talking about things like privilege or accessibility or white supremacy or ableism or whatever it may be? And so that's what excites me about even just the direction design is going, and something that I think a lot of leaders are going to have to grapple with and have to overcome.
That is so interesting, Vivian, that you're talking about this clash actually of the younger, let's say, and the most established design leaders. But it's interesting as well, because it means that as a design leader, maybe you don't have the title, but if you can have the expertise or maybe the knowledge, you can act as a design leader. You can become a leader, bringing this into a team or to an organization. I find this very interesting. I know that it's hard because there will be this clash, but I find this very, very interesting. This might be happening in order, I mean, not only in the field of inclusion, but in other things. I don't know, maybe in some kind of very emerging technology. I've seen this happening. The person who is the youngest in the room is the most expert as well. And how do we shift that? And maybe this goes back to what we were saying before, you were saying before, articulating the value of design, of making space, right? So I think this might be also a trait of design leadership, of make this space and being able to have these things happen. Otherwise, because you don't have the knowledge, so make space, right? So this is very, very interesting. I'm just going to connect to this other question because I think we're entering it kind of organically. So I'm going to go there. And I'll start with you, Vivian, obviously. It's not really a question. It's more like a theme for us to explore. What do you think that are the connections? I think we already touched on it, but what are the connections in your perspective of design, diversity, and leadership? And why does it matter?
I think it's everything. And, I'm coming from a counseling human service background. So, when you're training to become a therapist, when you're training to become a social worker, things like ethics are built in like day one of your program. Things like self-care and viewing self-care as an ethical imperative, because when you aren't operating at your best, you're more at risk for causing harm to other people, and you're more or less aware of your privilege or your power. Like that's baked in from day one in the programming. And so, when I made my career switch into UX and design, I thought it was really interesting how things like equity and ethics were just kind of more recently becoming a hot topic. And I think that speaks into, again, that shift from relevancy to maturity. I don't think that, I think in the beginning of, when I think about kind of like first wave of UX, like there wasn't a priority of actually being inclusive and equitable. It was a very truncated, privileged approach and understanding what it means to be human-centered. And now that the workforce is becoming more diverse, we're having more of these conversations. And I think it's so incredibly important for leaders to, one, get uncomfortable with being uncomfortable, because within these conversations, you're going to make mistakes. And that also brings about the importance of leaders leaning into what we call at Humanity Centered foundational skills. So these are things like, how do you apologize and why does that matter? These are things like the difference between calling in versus calling out, and when does the desire of being called in used as a way to weaponize like thoughts and ideas against another person. And so there's these kind of like foundational skills I think are starting to surface more in terms of leadership. And I think that leaders today have an opportunity to model humility, to model what does it look like to show up, make mistake, own it, and like keep it moving. And when you think about leadership and design and, diversity and all of that, I mean, I think really we're at a stage too where people are wanting and recognizing that they deserve more and better. And so there's a higher expectation that's being put on leaders and higher expectation on design to be more inclusive, to not exclude people based off of either their skin color or physical ability. And so I think it's becoming a key aspect of leadership, and leaders who struggle, who aren't comfortable talking about these very deeply human-centered topics are going to discover that people aren't going to look at them as leaders. And so I think it's an imperative in terms of design leadership.
Kind of following on that, again, generally +1 to everything Vivian said. When I think about that uncomfortability, one of the challenges, to get back to the last question, of leadership in making this space for diversity and inclusion is not only that leader's discomfort, but make my phone stop making noise, is not only their own discomfort, but recognizing that if they're a good leader and they have strong relationships with peers, they're likely going to make their peers uncomfortable, and those peers might get angry, might get upset, might get mad, and that leader has to be okay, not to forgive it or not to excuse it, but to recognize that that kind of uncomfortability is going to be broad, and that it comes with this territory, and it's part of how we make progress. To do everything they can as a leader, not just a design leader here, but as a leader, to not let the other people's anger and frustration and discomfort kind of quell what it is they're trying to help foster, and figure out how to work through it. I think a little bit about, because, well, one of the challenges that's going to happen so as Vivian has been pointing out, our workplaces are becoming more diverse as we are bringing in kind of the next generations of folks into not just design, but I would say kind of technology and product development more generally. And a lot of companies are patting themselves on the back by saying, yay, we're hiring diversity. And without recognizing that's only the start of the conversation. Like literally it's the least you can do. But then what they're often not doing is as they're bringing in these new voices and new perspectives into the organization, they get uncomfortable when those people are starting to reflect on their experience. Kind of famously what happened at Basecamp last year, where they wanted to try to stop, to not allow conversations around politics in the office, which was a direct result of the kinds of new generations of workers that were being brought into that organization. And instead of shutting it down, right, I think as a leader, you need to figure out how to not dwell in this uncomfortability, but acknowledge it, make room for it, and then work with one another to work through it, as opposed to either like sticking your fingers in your ears and hoping it goes away, or shutting it down as some solution.
Yeah. And I think too, like, I don't know, as like a Black woman, like, I think a lot of companies, and again, I'm coming from an American point of view, what Peter talked about, a lot of companies go out and like, oh, let's go hire diverse people. Let's go hire diversity. And even like that framing is already othering, right? And I think it's like really important to recognize that in the ways that companies over-index on diversity, which usually plays out in hiring, optics, and they under-index on inclusion, which is culture, which is harder work to do, right? And so what I see a lot, even in my time in corporate is, this idea of like canaries in the coal mine. So, back in the day in the States, maybe they practice in other parts of the world, miners would put canaries in the coal mine. And if the canary is still singing, then they know that there's not poisonous gas and they can go down and do their work. But the canary stops singing, then they know that there's poisonous gas because the canary died. So what I see a lot of companies do, and design orgs do this probably the most, is they hire a bunch of people who come from minoritized or marginalized communities, and the canary stops singing. They just keep throwing the people into the mind of the company, into the mind of the design org, and they stop singing. But optics looks good because they're bringing in people, but they're not being transparent about the people that aren't coming out. And so this is a larger conversation. I know we're getting close to time, but it's a larger conversation too about the reality of this work. In order to actually be human-centered in design, and this is a conversation that I know isn't going to like sell people on joining the industry, but you have to kind of count the cost of suffering. You want to be more human-centered, you want to be more equitable, you want to be more inclusive in design, like you're going to suffer. It's going to be uncomfortable. And I would even maybe push back and say, I think there is a moment and a need to learn how to dwell in that feeling of discomfort because it's constant. And maybe I think, if you're part of the majority, it may feel like forever, but for folks who come from minoritized and marginalized communities, like we're constantly in discomfort. Like that's just a part of being and living in this broken world. And so I think a lot of design leaders, especially ones that come from more privileged backgrounds, need to also learn how to just be uncomfortable, how to do the personal work required to do their best professional work, and actually challenge the status quo of what does it mean to be more holistically human-centered in design.
Thank you, Vivian. Thank you, Peter. I'll have to be the person who will be wrapping this conversation because it was super rich, but we are at time. Look, for those who are watching us, thank you so much. And thank you, of course, Vivian and Peter. The conversation went really above of what I was already expecting. And I already had high expectations, I must say, but it really went above. So thank you so much. And look, this was just a warm-up conversation of what the design leadership program will deliver. Of course, we talked a little bit about what is design leadership, how can we articulate the value of design, what are the challenges of design leadership. We talked about diversity and this role of diversity in design and in leadership, obviously. And in the program, we're going to be discussing and talking about the next steps and what is the next realm of design leadership, because we're shaping together with the industry, together with design leaders like Peter and Vivian, who will be joining for the masterclass. So the program will be a very systemic, let's say, program, but also practical. And we're going to be talking about hard decisions that we need to make. We're going to be talking about equipping people with methods and giving you the best on thought leadership, on design leadership. So for us to wrap it up, I just wanted for you to quickly, Vivian and Peter, to give, because they're going to be giving each one. So the 12 global masterclasses, each one of them is like with one of our amazing global design leaders. So Vivian will be giving one, Peter will be giving the other. And we have all of these amazing views that I already shared. We'll be giving the other design leadership masterclasses on top of the original workshop. So could you please just give a little bit of a spoiler before we break of what will be your session about?
Yeah, I'll be super quick. So I'm going to be helping people unpack what does it actually mean to be truly diverse and inclusive within your teams, and also the importance of it when addressing larger design problems within these complicated organizations. And so my global masterclass is called Shaping Diverse Teams and Cultures, and we'll be challenging the status quo on how to support folks in the workplace, as well as the importance of being trauma-informed and holistic.
And what I'm talking about, mine session is called, Shaping Organizations through Design Operations. And I'm going to be focusing on what Juliana referred to earlier in terms of this kind of architect mindset for how to structure and design your design organization to enable it to operate at its most effective and fullest.
Thank you, Vivian and Peter. This was an amazing session, my highlight of the week for sure. Here are the dates. And as you know, we have global masterclasses and local workshops for the program. It's a 12-week program. If you need any more information, please drop me a line either here, or you can also contact us with our program manager, Luna Pigato. Here is her email, also pop in the chat. We have this special code if you want to join us for the design leadership. It's 15% off. And also what is blocked here, my thing, but I think that's all I wanted to say. And I just wanted to say thank you everyone for joining us. This session was recorded, and it means that we're going to be sending you, if you want to rewatch or share with your friends, colleagues. Super thank you to Vivian and Peter. It was a blast. Thank you very much for joining us.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you. See you, everyone.